Good day, everyone. Today, I will be presenting the gist of my paper, Negotiating Identity in the Philippines in the Absence of a Gender Recognition Law. I am honored to present this paper as a demi-boy. I understand my privilege as a cis-passing non-binary person and gay man, and I hope that with this paper, I will be able to provide some guidance to our Transpinay sisters attending this summit. Just to set expectation, ito ang mga tatalakayin natin. Ang kasalukuyang sitwasyong legal, isang balangkas kung paano natin mapoprotektahan ang gender identity ng mga transinero, kasama na ang mga transpinay sa gitna ng kakarampot ng mga batas na nagbibigay ng kakaunting proteksyon. An overview of all these laws, ordinances, and policies where we can say we can get protection of transgender folks. Sa dulo naman, magbibigay ako ng paglalagom ng mga tatalakayin natin. Ngayon, pumunta na tayo sa current legal landscape. Let us start the discussion on the current status of gender recognition or the lack of it in the Philippines. To date, we do not have a comprehensive anti-discrimination law based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We also do not have any gender recognition law. Far from it, in fact, and unfortunately, several senators have been opposing the passage of even the most basic anti-discrimination law that covers SOGI. Dati, nagkagamit ng mga Transpinay ang Republic Act 1948 o yung clerical error law para makakuha ng birth certificate reflecting their gender identity and affirmed names. However, natigil ito dahil sa Silverio case noong 2007 kung saan sinabi ng Supreme Court na dahil walang substantial and procedural law na nagbibigay karapatan sa mga transinero na sumailalim na sa gender affirmation surgery na palitan ang kanilang kasarian at pangalan sa kanilang birth certificates, hindi pwedeng payagan si Silverio na magpalit ng pangalan at kasarian sa kanyang birth certificate. Iba naman ang sinabi ng Korte Suprema 1 year later sa Kagandahan versus Republic. Sa kasong ito kung saan ang petitioner ay isang intersex, pinayagan ng Korte na baguhin ang kasarian at pangalan ni Jeff sa kanyang birth certificate na naaayon sa kanyang gender identity. Ang sabi ng Supreme Court, in so ruling, we do no more than give respect to the diversity of nature and how an individual deals with what nature has handed out. In other words, we respect respondents' congenital condition and his mature decision to be male. Gustong sabihin, recognize ng Korte Suprema na ang biological and medical conditions may be considered as factors in legally recognizing gender identity. Understandably, magkaiba ang intersex at ang mga transinerong individual. Pero pwede nating tignan ito bilang isang, sabihin na nating starting point perhaps to argue in favor of the rights of our transgender sisters and brothers to be recognized based on their gender identity and their affirmed names. Meron namang 2018 case, itong Falsis versus Civil Registrar, na although tumatalakay ito sa sa marriage equality, bilang obiter dictum naman, sinabi ng Supreme Court na lacking a manifestly restrictive textual definition of marriage, the Constitution is capable of accommodating a contemporaneous understanding of sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. The plain text and meaning of our constitutional provisions do not prohibit SOGSC. This means that we can be cautiously optimistic, I guess, that we have allies in the Supreme Court. But for now, we must use what they currently have, although limited. Here, we have to look at different demographics and sectors. This is because what may protect transgender and non-binary youth may not be applicable to transgender and non-binary adults. So we'll look into these laws based on what we can use in schools, in the workplace, and in the community. Currently, we have the following laws that may help us as regards the respect of gender identity and expression, and to some extent, perhaps, recognition of affirmed names. Meron tayong equal protection and due process clauses under the 1987 Constitution, the Anti-Child Abuse Act, meron din tayong Department of Education, Department Order number 45 on school uniforms, although this applies only to public schools. We have the Child Protection Policy of 2012, also from DepEd, the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013, the Labor Code of the Philippines, the Safe Spaces Act of 2018, and various local anti-discrimination ordinances that include SOGI. With these laws and policies in place, I propose a framework in order to assert respect of gender identity and lobby for gender recognition even on a per-institution basis only. And dito naman, ito yung balangkas na pinopropose ko. Una, kailangan natin isulong ang implementasyon ng mga batas na nabanggit ko na. Ikalawa, igiit na kasama dito ang proteksyon para sa mga transinero. Ikatlo, ikampanya sa mga institusyon na kailangan sumunod sa mga batas na ito ang pagkilala rin sa gender identity. At ikaapat, kung may resistance man at syempre kung may sapat tayong legal support, ilaban ito base sa equal protection and due process clauses sa ilalim ng ating saligang batas. In parallel, I also propose a fifth aspect in this framework, which is to rally allies to help in the action. So kailangan natin pagdaanan muna tong let's discuss this first. Why is allyship important? Araw-araw ang ating pakikibaka. Pero mas mapapadali ito kung meron tayong mga kakampi o mga allies who can rally for our rights as well. What the LGBTQ community of course experience is social exclusion. So this is a multidimensional dynamic by which we are denied resources, rights, and opportunities that are available to most people within the same social, economic, and political and cultural spheres. And one of the things that we can do is to make them understand that the continued marginalization of the LGBTQ community has a cost to economy. With allyship, we can come together to promote what we need. And what we need are more inclusive policies that will allow LGBTQ people to have full access to the social, political, economic, and cultural opportunities and experiences that non-LGBTQ people have. In a study actually conducted by the Williams Institute of UCLA School of Law, it found that according to the LGBTQ folks, the most basic rights can provide so much economic gain. Ayon sa pag-aaral ng UCLA Law, kapag mas inklusibo ang mga bansa, kapag meron itong mga inklusibong mga batas, mas mabilis ang paglago ng ekonomiya nito. Many countries have already suggested that when countries become more inclusive, their economies are stronger, that passing laws to recognize the rights of LGBTQ people in participation in the marketplace, families, and important institutions have positive effects in the economy. So ito yung kailangan nating ipaglaban. Kailangan din natin ng allies to support us in this endeavor. So now let's go to the framework. Let us start with the protection in the schools. And this one is specific to the transgender and non-binary youth. So tingnan natin itong mga batas na ito pa isa-isa. Meron tayong Anti-Child Abuse Act. Pwede itong gamitin ng mga magulang kung ang mga anak nilang transinero ay nakaranas ng pang-aabuso at the hands of teachers or members of the school's administration. Kasong kriminal ang isasampa sa ilalim ng batas na ito. Meron din naman tayong Department of Education, DO number 45 on school uniform, although applicable lang ito sa public schools. Under this, hindi required ang school uniform sa mga public schools. Pwede rin na isabay dito ang pag-iit sa protection under the Safe Spaces Act, kung saan pinaparusahan ang gender-based abuse and sexual harassment. Of course, meron tayong child protection policy ng DepEd din ng 2012. Kung ang bullying naman ay ginawa ng principal o guro, maaaring magsampa ng kasong administratibo sa ilalim ng batas na ito. This policy includes protection of students from any form of violence regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Of course, meron tayong Anti-Bullying Act of 2013. Kasama ang gender-based bullying committed by classmates or schoolmates naman ang pinaparusahan sa ilalim ng Anti-Bullying Act of 2013. Gender-based bullying under this specific law is defined by the implementing rules and regulations as any act that humiliates or excludes a person on the basis of perceived or actual sexual orientation and gender identity. Siyempre kasama rin dito ang na magbibigay proteksyon ang Safe Spaces Act na nag-uubliga sa mga paaralan at mga pamantasan na sumunod sa Safe Spaces Act, which gives protection to students against gender-based abuses and sexual harassment. May karampatang obligasyon din ang mga administrators na ipaalam sa mga estudyante, mga guro at mga tagapamalakad sa mga eskwelahan na mayroong Safe Spaces Act at mga karapatan at obligasyon sa ilalim ng batas na ito. Kailangan din magkaroon ng polisiya upang mapigilan ang gender-based sexual harassment sa mga eskwelahan. Kasama na rin ang mekanismo upang tugunan ang mga reklamo sa ilalim ng Safe Spaces Act. Isa rin sa mga obligasyon ng mga pamantasan at mga paaralan ang magkaroon ng Committee on Decorum and Investigation at siguraduhing may karampatang representasyon ang mga persons with diverse SOGIs sa komite na ito at bawal din ang retaliation sa mga nagreklamo ng gender-based sexual harassment. So ito yung ilang mga batas na posibleng magbigay ng proteksyon para sa mga transinero lalo na sa mga kabataan. Pumunta naman tayo sa mga proteksyon kapag halimbawa ay nagtatrabaho ka na. So these are the possible protections that we can get for transgender and non-binary folks in the workplace. So for the protection in the workplace, we have the following laws applicable. Remember na may mandato sa ilalim ng Labor Code for equal opportunity. Sabi sa Declaration of Basic Principle under Article 3 that the state shall afford protection to labor, promote full employment, ensure equal work opportunities. The mandate for equal opportunity in employment is very clear. Siyempre, nandyan din ang Safe Spaces Act naman na nag-uutos sa employer na isa, ipaalam sa mga manggagawa na merong Safe Spaces Act at ang mga karapatan at obligasyon sa ilalim ng batas. Pangalawa, kailangan din magkaroon ng polisiya upang mapigilan ang gender-based sexual harassment sa mga opisina o paggawaan. Kasama na rin ang mga mekanismo upang tugunan ang mga reklamo sa ilalim ng Safe Spaces Act. So the protection accorded by the Safe Spaces Act cover gender identity and gender expression. We have to remember this. In fact, it is mandatory for employers to implement measures to prevent gender-based sexual harassment, which would even include conducting the necessary SOGI trainings to ensure understanding of the Safe Spaces Act. In fact, in a number of companies, this already includes the implementation of guidelines on transgender and gender non-conforming persons in the workplace, which includes syempre yung pagrespeto sa gender identity ng mga transinero, sa mga affirmed names ng mga transinero, and of course, providing for a company email that corresponds to their gender identity. Isa to sa mga bagay na ginagawa na namin sa kumpanya kung saan ako nagtatrabaho. And of course, the use of pronouns in email signatures para talaga mas maging open yung recognition ng gender identity sa mga colleagues natin. And of course, even using affirmed names in company IDs. So iilan lang ito sa mga proteksyon para sa mga manggagawa. Meron namang proteksyon naman para sa komunidad. So kasama dito yung Safe Spaces Act of 2018 at syempre yung mga local anti-discrimination ordinances na meron na tayo sa mga iilang mga munisipyo at mga lungsod. Maaari din natin gamitin ang Safe Spaces Act sa komunidad, lalo na't protektado dapat ang mga transinero laban sa gender-based sexual harassment sa pampublikong lugar. Siyempre, meron ding mga lokal na ordinansa na dapat magbigay ng kaukulang proteksyon sa mga transinero. The Safe Spaces Act and local ordinances extend protection in public spaces. This should be the case, like transportation hubs, public restrooms, and discriminatory practices as regards equal access to employment, healthcare, etc. And of course, all of these protections can be distilled into the Equal Protection and Due Process Clauses under the 1987 Constitution. So meron talaga tayong proteksyon dapat sa ilalim ng saligang batas. As declared by the Supreme Court in the Fasis case, which I mentioned a while ago, sinabi ng Korte Suprema na the Constitution is capable of accommodating a contemporaneous understanding of sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. The plain text and meaning of our constitutional provisions do not prohibit SOGSE. Understandably, kukonti pa lang talaga yung mga batas, mga polisiya at mga regulations that we have to protect the rights of our transgender sisters and brothers. So bilang paglalagom naman, gusto ko lang igiit na malayo pa tayo sa isang komprehensibong batas na magbibigay proteksyon at pagkilala sa gender identity ng mga transinero. So kailangan natin isabay ang pagsulong sa implementasyon sa mga batas na nabanggit ko na, ang paghikayat sa mga kakampi natin or mga allies natin na maaaring makatulong sa atin in order for us to lobby for these laws. At kung kakayanin, depende na rin sa legal support na meron tayo, ilaban ang mga paglabag na ito sa korte. Of course, we can do these together with additional help from our allies, with cautious optimism, of course, that there may be changes in the legal landscape, hopefully not far into the future. What is needed are people, activists, and allies of the transgender communities who can lobby for the protection of everyone, including our trans non-binary folks, diba? And advocate for our rights before Congress and the courts. And of course, that would be all for my presentation. I have provided a copy of the said paper to the organizers of this summit for reference. Hopefully, we can start probably a trans legal toolkit. We can use my paper as a reference or as a starting point. Thank you very much. That would be all for my presentation.